Welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast, where we have conversations about how to elevate the quality of life through movement, nutrition, recovery, and mindset practices.
Greater Culture Podcast, your host, Brad Marshall here, and really excited to be joined today by Pat Barber. Pat is someone who's just about had every type of job or role in the CrossFit space that's imaginable, from athlete to owner to seminar staff member to now helping affiliate owners and coaches level up their game by supporting them. So he has a whole lot of experiences and opportunities to share some of his insights. And so, Pat, thanks so much for jumping on the podcast today.
Yeah, man, stoked to be here. This is kind of right up my alley in terms of things I enjoy talking about. So
that is one thing I think I appreciate most about you is how much of a deep thinker you are about some of these concepts and how they relate and how we can actually help make people better. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your story. I said you had just about every role in the CrossFit space, but talk to us about how did you come into this world of fitness and lead you to where you're at today?
Yeah, I started years ago. I started doing CrossFit back in 2004, and it was just like something I did as a high schooler, and eventually started coaching volleyball in like late 2004, early 2005, and then from there, I was making my volleyball kids do training, and the only training I knew was CrossFit, so I just made them do CrossFit. So that was my first exposure to coaching and kind of doing stuff there, and then in 2006, I was working at a restaurant, and I quit working at that restaurant while like simultaneously coaching volleyball. But then I drove by CrossFit headquarters at the time and got a workout in, and my mentor was there. His name was Tony Budding, and he was the original media director of CrossFit. And he knew that I had just quit my job, and he was like, "Hey, you want to hold a camera?" And I was like, "Sure, let's do it." So I started flying to all these seminars around the world and filming all these amazing coaches deliver all this material. And the way that the seminars used to work in CrossFit was specialists would teach their specialty. So you'd have like Mark Ripito come in and teach powerlifting. You'd have Mike Bergner teach Olympic lifting. You have Buddy Lee teach jump rope, while Rob Wolf would teach nutrition and Greg would teach all the CrossFit stuff. And so it was like, you just got to learn from the best of the best coaches when I was just sitting behind the camera. And it was kind of fascinating to see these people present on the subject they were super passionate about. And then I would have to go back home and edit all the footage and cut it all down. And it's on like high tapes. So you're uploading it one time and then you're turning it digital and then you're rewatching and you edit down this 40 hours of footage, 30 hours of footage from 2 days of filming, because you're filming all day, both days or whatever it is. And then you cut it down to a 30-second clip to put online. So eventually, after seeing enough coaches coach this stuff millions of times, I began to know it. And eventually it was like, "Hey, can I coach?" And they're like, "Sure." And so I went through this like trial by fire process of trying to get on level 1 staff and teaching at local gyms and taking my level 2, which is now kind of like a similar to the level 4 sort of deal, and got on board. And I've been coaching seminars level 1 since like 2007. And then I've been run multiple gyms, and I've worked for the equipment companies, selling gear and building quotes for that. And I've competed in the games as an individual, as a team. I've run giant organizations and then also smaller gyms. I started the first affiliate programming company that sold lesson plans and programming for CrossFit affiliates to help kind of like solidify the delivery of what you're doing there. And these days, I now work for best hour of their day. Like you said, helping coaches and affiliates run better gyms. And then I also still teach level 1s and level 2s and spend a lot of my time raising my kids. I have 4 young boys and live in the mountains of Santa Cruz and love my life.
It's really amazing to hear how many different opportunities, and sometimes it's right place, right time, that you've had over the years, because when folks get really excited or into this world of CrossFit, they kind of see this one path of I can be a coach. And if I want to go beyond that, I probably have to open up my own affiliate. And that kind of is it, unless maybe I venture to seminar staff, but that's kind of a side gig. So what has your experience been with all of these different roles and responsibilities and turning this thing into a career that's not just sort of one linear path, but taking a variety of twists and turns along the way?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's the thing, is like there is this larger body of coaching, right? And it kind of all sits under this umbrella of like delivering this information to people. But then within that, there's all these subcategories of how that's done. There's the act of just doing coaching to a small group class. There's one-on-one coaching. There's the next level of developing coaches to deliver one-on-one coaching, or develop coaches to deliver small group classes, or let's pass along education where we're not even developing coaches. We're just transmitting information. We can do that in a digital or a literal sense. There's filming and editing video and producing content that way. There's so many different paths that you can take that kind of fall under this larger umbrella of like fitness and coaching. Even these days, there's like people who are just doing it as pure inspiration. Like, I'm just an athlete and I'm not even sponsored, but I'm making money off of like an image, which is wild to me. So it's like, for me, it's kind of I've had my eyes open to opportunities, and I've been willing to say yes to a lot of stuff. Like that very first interaction with Tony was like, "Hey, do you know how to film and edit video?" I'm like, "No, but I can definitely hold a camera, and I'm happy to learn how to do this." And I think I've said yes to many, many things over the years, and some of them have panned out, and a lot of them have just totally fallen through. Like, I've had these great business ideas that I push for and I try to make it, and it just falls flat. And it's happened time and time again where I'll try something, it doesn't work, and you just go, okay, and then you try something else. And it's kind of, there are many options within this space, but people do need to start somewhere. So I think regardless of whether it's, hey, I'm going to start coaching and that's my path, that's fine. But always keep your eyes out and your ears out for potential for growth in these other areas. Because there are so many little unique ways to continue to either earn money or make a change in the people that you're dealing with.
Yeah, this idea of building relationships, building skill sets that are transferable, and then the ability to say yes to opportunities as they arise. I've certainly seen that's a really cool way that people are carving out sort of their own little niche or figuring out their own corner of the world and how they can make a difference in people's lives. You mentioned when you were going around and touring with the seminar staff that you had all these specialists come in who are super passionate about their specific topic and how that translated. In the CrossFit world, we think of ourselves as sort of generalists, so you've got to learn a variety of skills. Over the years, you've come to understand a lot of information and a deep knowledge of CrossFit. So if you could, quantify what sort of specialty would you say is your wheelhouse at this stage of your career? Because I think from an outsider's perspective, I have my own personal opinion on what I see or what I think. But I think it's always fascinating to hear from the individual, what they feel like is something that they're really strong in or that they can do at a pretty high level.
Yeah. I would say clearly my understanding of the methodology of CrossFit and its general application is a strength of mine. I can speak to it in a very simplistic way to get people to understand the basic concepts behind this program, because it's truly unique in its quality and depth. And I feel like I can speak to that better than many can, because I didn't come from like sports and exercise science. I came from voice and musical theater. So like a lot of the education of this was like trial by fire of like hearing all the words and being like, I don't understand any of that, but I know I'm getting fit. And then over the years having to try to deliver it and then being like, well, I need to get this deeper, and then getting questions thrown at me that I'm like, I don't know. Let me research that. But I think what that creates is a sense of like, I'm very confident with my understanding and my belief structure around what I'm doing, but I'm not so confident that I can't see beyond it to something that might be more effective. And so I would say if I'm going to have a specialty, it's in the delivery and understanding of the purest form of CrossFit in a simplistic way. I would also say I tend to have a good capacity at developing coaches, like taking coaches from I don't know anything and I don't know what I'm doing to like I feel kind of confident in what I'm doing and have a better understanding of what's going on. I've done a lot of that over the years, like uniquely so compared to many, because I've been put in these interesting roles of leadership and kind of been given freedom to just like figure it out. And then I go, okay, well, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work. And oh, that worked. Let's take that and keep that and try to do that. So I would say those two things I would say are my specialty. What
Yeah, I
about
would
you?
100% agree. Yeah, I think it's funny, and I love that there's a synchronicity there of I would 100% agree that from the outside perspective, hearing you and the way you speak about CrossFit and the way you educate coaches and the way you can take topics and simplify them, that there really is a gift in, if you really want to understand a concept, being able to train others in it or speak to it shows that you have a depth of understanding of it. And then how do we take that information and get people better in the way of coaching? And so along those lines, I'm curious if your own personal, if you want to call it definition, or the way you've come to understand CrossFit has changed over the years. Because when you have people who've been in this game for as long as you have, it's interesting how some people find it as athlete and their own personal health and wellness routine. Then they become coaches, and then they get a little bit older, and it shifts and it changes. CrossFit in its definition is simple, yet also complex. And so people's way that they relate to it, the way that they think about it has changed over the years. And so I'd be curious from your perspective, from when you first started this and going on seminar staff to where you're at today, has your perspective or the way you think about CrossFit changed?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it most definitely has, but not really so much it hasn't really changed so much in the belief in it. It's just more changed in the places that I'm emphasizing rigidity. So like when it comes to doing CrossFit, I think there's many different ways to do it correctly. Whereas when I first started, it was like, this is CrossFit, like this is the one way to do it. But the mentality difference from then to now is I think now I'm more outcome based. So like it's more about what the program is going to give me, which is actually initially what the program was all about. It wasn't about the rigidity of the program. It was about the outcome of the program. What is it giving us? And I think for a lot of years, I had a firm structure of like, this is how you do CrossFit. This is CrossFit. This is how you do CrossFit, with the lens of that's what I had done and that's what I knew. I still believe the same things, but I don't believe it because this is how you do CrossFit. I believe it because by doing it this way, it gives you X, Y, Z, P, Q. Specifically in CrossFit, it's fitness. It gives you fitness and a very specific definition of fitness, of work capacity across broad time mental domains. So I would say the mentality of what I believe has shifted from emphasizing a focus on CrossFit and constantly varied functional movements executed at high intensity, the definition of CrossFit, to focusing on the outcome, which is fitness, and then making sure that the program that I'm doing supports that. So I would say psychologically, my shift and my focus has gone from the program to the outcome, but it hasn't changed what I think about the program. It just is kind of like reinforced what I originally was doing anyway. And it's just, I look at it from a different lens now, just because I see beyond the thing that I'm currently doing to the totality of the training that I'm doing, which is I'm trying to get to fitness.
I really appreciate that perspective, because I think I've seen that as well, not having been in as long as you have. But when you start working with athletes, the outcome is really what they're seeking, and they're figuring out, is this the right methodology and the right program that's going to help me achieve the outcome? And so you have to understand and get to know the athlete's desire. Is it to go compete locally? Beyond that, is it to be able to play with their kids? Is it to get off of medicine? Is it to, and CrossFit as a program can help with all of those. It's just the application is going to look potentially a little bit different. Totally. And so I love that perspective that CrossFit is this big, broad opportunity for folks to get healthier and fitter, but the application might look a little bit unique and different. And so that's why I think people's perspective or view of CrossFit can be a little bit different or change over the years as their goals and their own personal outcomes change.
Totally. And what I would say is those three variables that you're messing with within the methodology of CrossFit are in intensity, variety, and volume. So if you look at those three as the three things that we're going to like modulate based off of the outcome of the individual that they're looking for, like we're still looking for the same, for me, fitness, but like we can look to do different things, and based off of the individual, we mess around with intensity, volume, and variability, and we get a different outcome. And different people need different things, but those are essentially the three variables that can still fit well within the CrossFit realm. But there's a wide array of ways we can slap these things together depending on the outcome that we're looking for.
And I think it's interesting too is, I don't know if it's a shift, but you start to see there's an individualized process to that. If I want to get to know what somebody's personal fitness goals are, I have to get to know them as a person. Is that possible in a class of 10, 15, 20 people to still be able to deliver that? And you've seen this shift of people talking about, well, it's maybe better to go to more small group. It's better to go to personal training and things like that. And people make, their own beliefs and stands. What has been your perspective on that? Of the group model hasn't changed. The class sizes are probably not that much different than maybe what they were. We all have different goals, different outcomes we're striving for. As someone who's helping coaches be able to deliver a great product on the floor, is that still possible within that model, the group model?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially when it comes to the true power of this program, right? So there's so much wrapped up in the power of the actual mechanics of CrossFit programming and how it works. So that is very potent, and nobody is really arguing the potency of that. It's going to give you, it's going to elicit change. It's going to elicit adaptation. Even it done poorly elicits adaptation. And it honestly, even it done poorly elicits better adaptation than like 90% of what you find in conventional gyms where people are just wanking around doing nothing, right? So we're still getting like a great like overall physiological adaptation from that. And I would say that most people aren't dialed in enough as individuals to need anything particularly unique for them. A good generalized CrossFit program is going to touch like at least at the bare minimum, like 80% of what you need in like your overall training. And what's more important is that you're showing up and you're doing this more often than not showing up. Like you're getting like 3 to 4 days a week of training in, because we live in a society where the vast majority of the time we're spent just sitting around doing nothing. So I would say there's the true greatness of it is that you can show up, get a marginally good program, do it in a group of people, get okay coaching, and still see like fantastic freaking results relative to going into a gym and doing it on your own and being really consistent. Because like just by the raw nature of what this program is you're getting a lot. Now, where you can argue this is like if people are moving really injuriously, they're moving really poorly, or they're exceeding load capacities or exceeding overall volume. If you hurt people, they don't keep training. So I think where I would put a caveat is we have to err on the side of being more cautious with people to some degree. But at the same time, that's not hard to do in group settings, even for the most new of coaches. It's just setting some basic scaling standards within your facility. And then even newer coaches can get people 80% of the way there. Now, where I say we really take a gym from like a mediocre gym to a gym that's going to thrive long-term as well as just in the short term is they're delivering that stuff, but then trying to make those interactions as personalized as possible. And then you and I have been in the community for a bit talking and on coaching development and stuff. It's like the goal of a coach as they improve is to offer a more personalized experience for the individual who's in front of them. So that means they need to have the general capacity to manage the flow and overall safety and overall mechanics of a class, but then have the ability, both educationally and communication wise, to very rapidly make personalized decisions for people throughout an entire class. And when you're newer, that's going to be a 2-person class that you're able to do that well with. When you're more experienced, you can do that with a 20, 25 person class and offer, I mean, it's exhausting, but you can do it. And so I think on all ends of the spectrum, I would say that the group class model still works for the vast majority of people who are going to step through doors better than going and training at their gym by themselves with their headphones on. For many other like non hooks that we'd normally think about of other people and good music and a coach who's looking at them and like going a little bit harder than they would if they were in their garage by themselves, like all of these things are going to hook people and give them far more than I would say even the potential of risk of some of these movements are hard and we could maybe hurt ourselves. But it's like, I would say yes. And then there's like lots of little ways that we can elevate or make that worse for people if it depending on how good we are at delivering this stuff.
Yeah, I think the pros of walking into a group environment, especially if we're looking for general physical preparedness, far outweigh the cons. And like you said, the caveat is if you have a coach who at least is watching and is understanding movement mechanics, even to the most basic degree of like, that doesn't look right, let's adjust that, then people are going to get some incredible benefits, not only physically, but also most likely mentally, emotionally, all of those things as well, because you're in that community group environment. You mentioned this idea that the coach, when starting off, is probably going to be able to handle this on a smaller scale and then generally build up. Love to talk about this idea of improving as a coach, because it is something I think you are very skilled at, that you've learned, but now you're able to take that information to help other coaches develop. Coaches probably see what good coaching looks like. They go take the L1, and the red shirts make it look so easy that then they step in front of a class and they're like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. And now I'm trying to figure out and get my wits about myself. When you think about your own coaching journey or helping new coaches, what's sort of like your hierarchy of things to focus on, especially like maybe as a new coach and then like as you build and develop? Because we've got sort of those 6 fundamental skills of leading a class, but it can be hard to know like, where do I spend my time? And I want to learn everything and I want to get really good at everything. But I think it's better if there's sort of this hierarchy or this process. So what's your thoughts on that of like working from new coach to kind of developing coach to like, let's take this thing to the next level and be an expert?
Yeah. I mean, it's something I think about constantly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes.
Because if you can work it back to its root, like you could improve the lives of so many people, right? If you can truly say, start here and you will be better off. You're going to like fundamentally impact people in a different way. That's just it. So I would say one of the best things that if I'm talking about starting other people, and this is kind of not answering the question, but I'll get into it, is like you need to see what it looks like done well. And you need to see like what it looks like done well over and over again. And that's why whenever I was developing coaches or whenever I've spent time is like, we need to make sure one coach in the facility is like legit, because then all the other coaches see that person to aspire to, and they're trying to emulate that. So when we were first building gyms, like that would be the key, is you drop one heavy coach, just like a baller coach who's what we want to see, you put it, and then all of a sudden all these coaches who sprout up around them. And so they already have a sense of what it feels like to go through a good class, so they can then go out and execute a little bit better. Now, if we're then going to take a coach and just build them from zero and work their way up, there is a certain sense of basic education that needs to happen. So knowledge, to me, is the foundation. It's the lens. It's your paradigm. It's your way that you view any given situation. Is you have this bit of information, and then you're looking at everything through this lens. Like that's your information. And luckily, when you first start, that lens is pretty narrow and it doesn't need very much in it. It's like you need to know some basics of human movement. Okay, range of motion is important. Safety is important. Safety standards are pretty basic. The back shouldn't be moving while they're moving dynamically. There should be no flexing and bending of the back. The knees should stay tracking out over the toes, which oftentimes means they need to be pushed out. Weight needs to be balanced about the foot, which oftentimes means they need to have their weight back in their heels. And we need to be hitting proper ranges of motion. So finding those out for the different movements. And like those like 5 things, that's about it, you know, and you need to have an active shoulder, right? You need to have an active shoulder so you're not resisting to any load acting upon you. And it's like, you know, those 6 things, and you can like start to pay attention for those. You've got the basic knowledge for starting your coaching journey. So once you've known that, I would say if you're looking to go teach, it's about focusing on your general flow, your structure throughout a class. So spending some time the night before being like, I'm going to write out how it's generally going to look, and I'm going to go in with intention, because going in with intention is very different than winging it and hoping it works out. If you have a general flow that you can punch through and you know the basics of the knowledge of like, I'm looking for these points, we can start to develop other things. So first, know the couple things, then have a general structure, then follow the general structure, looking for those couple things that are going to be jumping out in class. Ideally, I don't have to teach it, but you should know how to talk to other human beings. You should know what general levels of communication look like of, hey, when I ask somebody to do something, I don't command them like they're a piece of shit. I ask them, hey, can you push your knees out a bit more? Oh, that's great. I'm so stoked you push your knees out, rather than get your knee out, you bag of suck. Like it's like, come on. Like I shouldn't have to teach you that, but that might be something you need to learn along the way, is how to communicate a little bit more effectively. But I would say if I'm going to look at a hierarchy, knowledge, basics, class structure, there we go. So go in with intention, and then work on seeing, correcting. And seeing and correcting are applying the knowledge that you have using the class structure. You're looking for fault. You see fault. When fault happens, you try to not make it happen anymore. So you say, hey, don't do that, or hey, try this, preferably. And then if it works, you store that little bit of education, and then you just do that over and over again and continue to refine. Obviously, I think you should sign up to the Knowledge or the Knowledge Pro and get all of the information that we talk about in there, because we've figured out a lot of cues and we've made a lot of mistakes, and we like to talk about this stuff. So you can see some good examples in that. But other than that, I'd say that's a good general framework to work through to start off with.
Yeah, the Knowledge Pro is really awesome in terms of a coach development tool to get videos, get conversations, just be around others who care about the skill and the craft of coaching, and you just pick up little tidbits. It's always fun when you all post a video of like, find the fault, and you're just like watching it and it's slow-mo and you're like, I'm still not sure I see a fault here. And then all of a sudden they say what it is. You're like, oh yeah, there it is.
There it
okay.
is, yeah.
But I love that perspective of understanding, like, we have to have a fundamental knowledge before we can go out and apply it. And once we have that knowledge, we've got a little set of intention of how we want a class to go or what we want it to look like. We can actually see if we can be close to that. And then the piece that I think you said is harder to teach is the soft skill development. People tend to have a fear of public speaking, getting up in front of folks, being able to build relationships, being able to command a room. And when you think about the experience of somebody walking in, you know, they typically like to trust the person who's in front of them. So there's got to be some level of confidence and competence with who's in front of you. And I find that to be a challenging one to build and develop, because it does take reps and time, coaching, mentorship. You can watch videos, you can learn how to cue, you can see movement faults, but being able to get up in front of a group and deliver confidently, that seems to be a more challenging one that you don't see as much out there around how do we build that skill. How have you come to understand or help others in that regard? If you want to talk about it as, you know, command and presence and things like that, and soft skill building, how do folks go about building a sense of confidence and command over the class?
Yeah. We used to refer to that as like the X factor. It's like, this coach has all this stuff, but they don't have the X factor. But it's not actually a nebulous thing. It's a very real thing that's in like all of any kind of development, whether you're leadership development or business development or whatever it is. It's there, and it's got a name, and it's emotional intelligence. So there's IQ, which is how well you can solve problems using logic and kind of piece things together and think outside the box and stuff. And then there's EQ, which is a emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. And it's something that they've actually known about since like, it was like 70s or 80s. There was like some foundational studies on it, because what they would find actually is they would do these problem solving pieces. And there was something like in 70% of the tests that they did, that involved real life people, people who had lower IQs would solve the problem faster than people who had higher IQs. And they were like, this doesn't make sense. There's a discrepancy in intelligence. Like, these people are objectively more intelligent when we talk about data and facts and logic, but they're not solving the situation as fast. And it's because they weren't able to step out and look and feel what was going on to some degree. So this concept of emotional intelligence, I mean, it's something that you can dig into and research a lot. And step one is knowing that it exists. there's the subtlety of human emotion and knowing how to relate to people, as you call it, soft skills. Like, this is something that exists, and you can feel it if you just watch different people maneuver through the world. You'll see some people who you're like, wow, that person has a really easy time in social settings. That person, it's kind of falling flat. And you might be one of those two people or somewhere in between. So there's a difference in how we navigate based off of how well we're able to read other people and also know ourselves. So there's this sense of, you need to know how you're perceived in situations. And there's some people who can do this, and this is self-awareness, who can do it better than other people can. And so you have to be able to be self-aware, but you also have to be aware of how yourself is affecting others. And then you have to be able to judge how other people are responding to the things that you're doing. And this can be very mechanical in the sense of, like, let's talk about seeing, correcting. When I say go deeper, do they go deeper? Like, that's a scenario where what I'm doing impacts another person, and I can go, okay, did that do anything different? If I say go deeper in a higher voice, go deeper. Did that help? Go deeper. Oh, that helped. Oh, that changed something. Oh my God, something I did changed the way that worked. And like, that's a weird little bit of, you can reflect upon how you're delivering things, and there's some self-reflection there. So being aware of what's going on and knowing that it's a thing is huge. There's a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's about as straightforward as it gets. It's like, it's got a test, it ranks you on a score and talks about all these different points. I think it's 78 different points of emotional intelligence that you can go through, and tells you how to increase your emotional intelligence in these areas. And it's like very straightforward, and it's a must read, I think, for any human. If you're like, hey, I want to be more effective at moving through the world, it's like, well, here's a book. I think it's very just literal information, and it's the people who originally coined the term emotional intelligence and did all the studies on it, and they were mentoring people for a long time, and they were like, oh, wait a second, we've got this, like, all the information on how to fix this behind closed doors. Let's just write a book that shows you how to do it all. I found it at the airport. I read through it, and I was like, oh, this is all the stuff I've been like trying to put my finger on what it is. And it's like really clearly laid out. And here you go. So I'd say if you want to improve in that world and develop your own soft skills, there needs to be some genuine reflection and some stuff done internally to see how we're impacting and building our emotional quotient or our emotional intelligence. So dig into that. Emotional Intelligence 2.0. Get after it. There you go.
Yeah, it's an awesome book, and I think it does give us a framework to work off of.
Correct.
Because you see somebody in front of a group and you're like, wow, they have a way or a sense of, when they say, hey, class, let's bring it in, everybody walks in, they start talking, people start to listen. You're like, that's amazing, because this other coach, they seem to try and do the same thing, and it doesn't feel like it's the same. Or as they're navigating the room, there's a sense of confidence when they're delivering cues, or people are listening, they're smiling, they're laughing, they're having a good time. And others, it feels like it's more of a struggle. And it might be, because it's some of those skills that you have to work on. And I think that's one of the harder parts of figuring out as a coach how to develop, because you can get better at seeing and correcting. You can get better at finding faults, and you can get better at some of the technical side of the things. Just the more you get eyeballs on movement, the sharper your eye gets. But to dive into that side of the house, I think it's the more fascinating of the worlds. I also think it's the harder to improve and give people a roadmap on what does that actually look like? What am I going to do in class the next time to try something out to see if I can develop or be different? So are there certain practices, skills, things you encourage coaches, because you've done a lot and you've watched a lot of classes of people from A to Z, and when you're guiding and influencing folks, are there things that you've shared or talked to them about in terms of improving their EQ as a coach on the floor?
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of the reason that we find such a difficulty with it is there was not a lot of words associated with it previously. There's not like a lot of structure, which is why I think that emotional intelligence book is so good. It's like literally you can see like, oh, this is what that person does well, and it's called this, and this is how you do it. It's similar to seeing and correcting where you're like, hey, here's the faults. This is where your eye should go. Look there. It's like the same sort of deal. I think where it gets a little bit more nebulous is our perception gets tied into it, and we have this way that we perceive the world for so long, where it's like I've lived this way for so long that it's very hard to very hard to step outside myself and view the situation objectively. And there needs to be like a surrendering of ego to some degree to see if we're actually objective in what's going on. You know, like two people could watch the same scenario and pick up very different things on a subtle level. There's also a kind of a spectrum that people can be in where like they might have zero emotional intelligence. Like they actually are medically like on a spectrum of like, I can't see it at all and I have to fake it. And so what I've done is what I've heard for people who are on this kind of spectrum of emotional intelligence is there's a tool called Ford. And it's just a way of intentionally connecting with other people beyond just the mechanics of what's happening in a class. And Ford is family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. And the idea is that you attempt to have conversations with people, even in the gym setting, that are outside just the mechanics of coaching, and then paying attention to the responses you get while talking to them about things that they might have a deeper connection to. So it's going to help build connection. So you as somebody who might be on the spectrum of emotional intelligence that are way over here and don't really see it very much, you might have an easier time just being like, I should talk to them about family, recreation. So family, do they have family? What family do they have? Do they have kids? Are they passionate about it? Are they not passionate about it? Is there anything you can relate to family wise? Recreation, what do they do for fun? They can't say the gym training that they're currently doing. It has to be, what else do you do for fun? Like you collect, glass figurines, and they're like, really? Glass figurines? That's amazing. Like, what do you like about glass figurines? And like digging into that and caring about other people. Family, occupation. Occupation is what they do for work. Usually people have some either expertise that you can unpack there, and they like it when you're invested in what they're doing. Recreation, and then dreams. And dreams is like not what did they dream about last night, but more like if they had all the money in the world, what would they go do? Like what is your passion? What is the thing that you'd like would love to somehow achieve? And I would leave that as like you're starting to really get to know them before you dig into dreams. Stay on the other ones first. But that is just a basic tool of like using that as your conversation pieces and to naturally be curious about other people will help you develop empathy. It'll help you develop the ability to see like things that people start to be passionate about, and you can pay attention to their face and their eyes and the tone of their voice, and just like start to examine where they change things. And that alone will raise your levels of emotional intelligence, because you'll be able to start to pick up on these subtle things. Like not many people care about getting a little deeper in a squat or whatever it might be. And so you're not going to get the same level back and forth. So I think that's a very tangible tool that I've offered a lot of people.
I really like that approach of using Ford, and I found that to be super effective as well in building relationships. And it really sits on this foundation of, you mentioned the word, this idea of curiosity, of we've got to care and care enough that I am interested or intrigued to learn about this person, not just how they move, not just what kind of weights they can do, but what's beneath all of that. And if I can walk into a situation with a sense of curiosity, it's amazing what you'll come to find, what you'll come to learn, what you come to understand of not just what's going on in their life, but maybe why that's leading them to want to come to the gym, which leading them to want to move a certain way and hit certain goals. So this foundation of how do we build more curiosity into our coaches of being explorers and figuring out and trying to pinpoint all these little details. That to me is the fun part of coaching, which is sometimes hard to train people on or build in them, but is a foundational piece that the more we can coach curiosity in coaches, the more likely it is that they're going to build great relationships, have a higher EQ, and deliver on the floor a little bit more effectively.
Totally agree with that. And I would say, like, I think you really hit it on the head with just like focusing on making, or maybe just making curious people coaches. I think there has to be a certain level of lowered self-protection to be curious about others. Like I think a lot of people are so guarded with who they are that it's almost a challenge to like go at someone and ask, hey, what do you love? What do you find like, because all of a sudden, what if we disagree on sports teams? It's like, who gives a shit? Like nothing they could say should really impact you. But if you start to like be curious about other people, like you kind of have to let go of a lot of your own hangups. And I think that that's one of the difficulties in getting coaches to be curious, is like they have to be kind of okay themselves. But I think that's a good journey to be on. Like, if you want to be effective in this, you should be pretty okay yourself. So you should be curious first and foremost about yourself. Why do I believe this? Why do I coach this way? Why do I use that cue? Like these constant questions, they don't need to make you insecure about what's going on. They can just be like, oh, I think it's because of this. That seems about logical. Cool. Let's move on. And then once you're curious about yourself, like being curious about other people, that's that stage of like, oh, let's dig into this. Like, why do you do this? Like, that's fascinating. And like being genuinely fascinated by really quirky stuff, because human beings are fascinating. Like, and it can start with the stuff in coaching of like their movement. It's like, ooh, why are they moving like that? And that curiosity around what's happening. And then it can be curiosity into their lives. And then it can be curiosity in this whole darn human experience thing. But I would say if there's a skill to develop as a coach, curiosity is one you most definitely should start to examine. If you think you know it all, like, come on, man.
Yeah.
You're wrong. Like, you're straight up wrong. Like, I'm gonna throw it out there. Like, if you think you know it all, if you're sitting there back being like, I know it, I've got it all, I've figured it out. It's like, I challenge you to go deeper, because that's what I challenge you.
It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we get excited about a topic, we learn a little bit, and you're like, wow, I know so much about this topic. I'm probably one of the experts. And then all of a sudden, the further along into that topic you get, the more quickly you get humbled and realize there's a lot more that I didn't know. And sometimes it's getting over that hump of like getting back to okay, let me put on the white belt again and see if I can start again. Yeah, somebody had shared that statistic with me. Maybe it was even like a sales business development thing, of this idea of 70-30, of if we're trying to build relationships or great communicators, they tend to listen 70% of the time and speak 30. And if you start to look at and assess your conversations with folks, who's doing more of the talking? Is it you or is it the person? And if you find yourself that it is you, going back to that sense of curiosity, how can I turn this to get them to speak more, and I listen and just engage and then ask the next question versus trying to jump in, or, those things. So I've always thought that was kind of an intriguing statistic that I keep in the back of my mind, of who's doing more of the communicating in certain contexts, and how that can help with curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, that's a hard one.
So,
I mean, it's a hard one, because like, I think part of being excited about something is wanting to share. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, if you're like really into something, so like say you first find CrossFit and you're like, I just want to tell everyone, like you're really into it. It's very hard to hold back because you're so excited.
Yeah. It's also our way to bridge with people, and you fall into the trap of either one-upping or stealing the thunder, or it's like, oh man, I remember the first time I squatted 225, and you go into a story about yourself and you're like, whoa, like you just totally flipped this thing. Instead of like keeping all the light on them, you like brought it on yourself now. And it's our way of connecting with people, though, because it's like, oh, you shared this thing, I want to share it with you. So it's subtleties like that get us sometimes too.
Well, but it's also our own insecurities, right? So like, if we feel, I don't know, if we can't, how do I say this? I think a lot of us want to be seen, regardless of how confident we are. And I think the less confident we are, the more we want to be seen. Some of us hide, some of us like project. I see a lot of overconfident people who are projecting their own insecurities through the things that they say about how awesome they are. And you're like, oh shit. Like, and you see that in coaches sometimes, where you're just like, oh, what are you doing? Like, this is not about you. Like, there's like, but it takes a sense of like, it takes a sense of humility to have someone be like, dude, I just PR'd my clean at 225 pounds. And like, isn't that amazing? Yeah. And then you'd be like, yeah, you're awesome. But, you know, in your head, you're like, I can clean triple that, you know, like, or double that. And you to not like have any comparison and like, just be genuinely excited for them and not say it. Like, I don't know, like maybe that was a journey that I had to go on of like, I've always been quite dominant in the physical side of things, and people never thought that of me. They'd do like a lift, and then they'd like look to me for validation, and I'd be like, that's great. But I like kind of wanted to be like, but it's still 100 pounds less than mine. You know, like I know you're so you'd find ways to slip in your numbers there. Like, oh, but I'm also, but like, I don't know. I think as we develop and grow, there's that letting go of needing to be, to be the person sharing in that way. And we can genuinely celebrate other people's successes. And I think coaching is a fantastic place to do so, because you almost can take success in their successes. Like when they win, like you got them there, like you created an environment. So it's like, you don't need to have your own dominance anymore. It could be like, your goal is about them winning. And I think it's a similar thing to parenthood. It's like, it's not about reliving your childhood. It's about getting them to win, getting them to feel like they're winning. And it's just such a magnificent place to be, because you can be like, oh, I don't matter as much anymore. And this is great. And I can just sit and listen and I can be present. But when you're still working through those times where you lack the humility to do so, you want to share your thing, because you're like, I'm also awesome. I know, I see you're awesome, but I'm also awesome. And I don't know. I think some people have a harder time with that than others. And it was definitely something I had to work through. Just holding.
No, I can totally relate to that. And I think the word that comes to mind is both experienced and a mature coach, because you start to see these athletes, and when they start to either perform to the same level or beyond your own personal capabilities or fitness, there's some insecurity there of like, I'm the coach. I should be the one who's providing insights and tips and cues. And now they're doing better than me in a movement or a weight or etc. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, like, do I have the ability to coach them? They're just like, they're outperforming me now. Versus like, I can celebrate them and what they're achieving and what their fitness is. Or even if it is the first double under, and for you, it's like, that was so far long ago that you experienced it, but can you get as excited for the first double under as you can for the heavy, PR that somebody hits? And I think as a coach, that's where you start to see the mature coach. Like they can be excited for all levels of it and keep the light on that athlete as long as possible, so that they can experience the thrill and the magic of CrossFit.
Hell yeah. And like, it's so fun when you do, once you get to that place of just like being able to genuinely celebrate the successes of others. Like, it's because there's so many more of those than your successes. Like, on a very literal sense, it's like, it's just so much more joyous to be into other people winning. Like I cannot recommend getting there sooner enough. I wish I had tips of how to do it, but I think some of it has to be learned, of just like let's get
some of it comes with age, where it's like the days of 1 rep PRs maybe are now more in the rear view mirror than out the front. So you're like, well, so I think there's a certain level of that as well. But one of the questions I wanted to make sure I got a chance to ask you, because as someone who's a very deep thinker, one of my favorite things to ask folks is, a lot of us have different values, principles, things we use that sort of guide and influence, as you mentioned, our perspective, the way we interact and go about ourselves and the world and those around us. And as someone who I know has done a lot of thinking in that world, what would you say are some of your sort of principles or values or guiding lights, if you will, that kind of influence or impact the way you navigate and think about the world and yourself and things like that?
Yeah. I think something that I've come to really hold on to is to just do everything in your power to never lie. I think you don't need to be a brutally honest prick, but I think that there's many ways that we lie that erode the foundation of our very being. Whether it's like little things like just omitting certain portions of something, whether it's in relationships or whether it's to yourself. It's like, I don't drink that much. Or no, I don't eat that bad. Or it's like, I buy something on Amazon and my wife goes, how much was that thing you bought? And I go, it was $10 and it was $13.99. It was like, why didn't I say $13.99? That would have been just as easy to say, but I said 10 because I was slightly insecure about what I had done, and I think that when we try to live in like a very pure and honest truth, and you can still be kind within that, like and there's times where there's harsher things to say and they need to be said, but I think we start to live a lot more in congruence with our own way that we want the world to perceive us, like, because there's nothing that we're hiding, and it just becomes that much easier to walk through the world with your head up and be like, you see me, and this is me, and I'm good with this because I've said everything I need to say. So I think for me as a coach and as a man, like, that's been something that I've really had to work on, not because I was a big liar, but because there was stuff that was not quite fully truthful, like it was just not right there. And, or I said it in a way that it couldn't be heard. Or I said something that like was easy to misinterpret. And it's like, let's try to be as truthful as possible and be really understood. And that's for me. I mean, that might be just my personality type or whatever it is, but that framework and that motto has allowed me to have a better life, like to be more grateful for things, to be more present, to not have anything sit on my mind. Like, I don't have anything hang in my head for longer than the time it takes me to say it. How cool is that? Like, if I say something, it just sits there and then I move on. I don't need to be like, oh, I wonder if, what if they find out? What if, it's like, you just say it and it's like, well, I'll deal with it as it happens. And then I can move on. And it's just like, it allows you to have so much more peace. Yeah. So I'd say that's a huge one for me, is don't lie.
I love it. I love that idea of honesty with yourself, honesty with others. Be about what you say, let your actions speak to that. And so live a life where you're fulfilled, but also feeling like you're living honestly.
Yeah.
And so with that, Pat, it's been awesome having you on the podcast today for this conversation. I'd love for folks to be able to connect. I know you've got a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
You mentioned, obviously helping out with Best Hour of Their Day, the Knowledge Pro, also sharing some of your insights, being a father and what that's like. So if people are interested in connecting with you, what are some of the best ways or tools that they can do that?
Yeah. You can shoot me an email directly at Pat@besthouroftheirday if you have anything related to coaching. You can find my Instagram account, which is Coach Pat Barber on Instagram. I also have a coaching account. It's called the Coaches Guild. You can find that, which is just kind of like random thought things in that just pop into my head. And then I have a parenting account, which I found very passionate fatherhood, called the Fathers Guild. And the Fathers Guild has been really fun for me to examine how to do this fatherhood thing well. So yeah, I'm curious.
It's awesome. Well, I'm very grateful that we've crossed paths and connected through Best Hour of Their Day and getting a sense of how you think about coaching and how you think about development and helping people live happier and healthier lives. And appreciate you taking some time today and look forward to the next time we get a chance to connect.
Yeah, same, man. Thank you so much.